Hello, my name is Roger Pine. I'm with Holistiplan, and I'm here today with Aaron Gray. He is the Managing Director of Client and Advisor Experience at Buckingham Strategic Wealth. Aaron, so good to be with you today. Thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
You missed the memo about the dress code. I'm wearing the tuxedo.
So
today.
I can run down. I have a powder blue. I don't know if that's going to clash with what you got going on.
Yeah, we'll edit that in later on for the
Perfect.
thumbnail. You with the powder blue tuxedo. Thank you for joining me. This series is Winning with Holistiplan. We really are trying to cover how people use technology to make their client experience, their advisor experience that much better. Holistiplan, of course, is just one piece of every firm's tech stack. And what's interesting about you is you're here representing Buckingham Strategic Wealth. By RIA standards, huge firm, and multiple offices, multiple advisors coming in from different backgrounds because some of them have come through acquisitions, so they have their own way of doing things. Beyond just the managing a big company aspect of that, there's also the service delivery piece. How do you establish service standards? How does Buckingham approach? I know this is a big question, but how does Buckingham approach that problem as an organization?
Well, I mean, and there's so many dimensions to that, right? Because there is just the pure tech stack part of that in terms of how do we set up everybody with a full, toolkit. And then certainly there's the service delivery in terms of how we want to set our standards of what the client experience is going to be. And it is important to us in our model to have the client experience for a client that is working with somebody out of our Palo Alto office to be very similar to the experience somebody's working out of the Short Hills office in New Jersey and everywhere in between. And so it's a little tricky because we're distributed teams, about 45 offices or so across the country, about 200 advisors in total. We work as teams. So those 200 advisors kind of group up into a lot of sub teams there. But there's challenges in terms of individual advisors' personal backgrounds. A lot of us in Buckingham, is not me, but we have a lot of CPAs or enrolled agents that are really comfortable with these tax conversations. I don't have that tax background. I know enough to be dangerous enough to pass the CFP test. But that was, that's one of the things that we want to do is kind of back to my analogy of the toolkit is let's fill the toolkit with a lot of really good tools and resources. A lot of that ends up being fintech that puts all of our advisors in a common position to deliver very consistent advice and really think about not only set the standard of here's what we want to make that experience, what we want to deliver as a part of our client experience, but then also kind of standardize the backstage tool set that all of our advisors are using. So, it's one thing to say, hey, everybody, we want to make doing an analysis of whether Roth conversions make sense for our clients. That's something that we want to make a part of an annual conversation with clients. Cool, it's great to say that, but if we don't have a common tool set that allows us to do that the same way across teams, across locations, you end up really delivering very different advice. And so there's a lot of dimensions. It's really tricky, and I'm happy to get into details if you want me to dig into any one of those, but certainly relative. And I was, by the way, Roger, I was one of those offices that was not a part of Buckingham. It was small, independent, 4 of us working in downtown Denver, and eventually got acquired by Buckingham. I've been with Buckingham now for about 6 years. So we did have our own tool set and our own ways of doing things. So I did experience that kind of coming into a bigger group and then understanding what the new challenges are when you have a lot of distributed folks and a lot of distributed locations and trying to unify what that tool set and the client experience ends up looking like.
Sure. Yeah. And I, just working with your firm a little bit, watching from externally, I know there's a lot of training organizationally. You do a lot of, you just got to take the time to, first of all, develop what are our standards going to be, hash that out, present that to everyone. Clearly, a lot of infrastructure has to be built just in talking about how do you communicate these things. When we talk about the technology piece, because that's kind of why we're here. When let's say, to use the example of Roth conversions, maybe that's a good example or not, you can tell me, but you as a firm start with, this is a thing that is a priority for us, or tax planning, or whatever it's going to be.
You got it.
And then there's a decision about, do we already have this tool in-house? Do we already have something that does this, presumably, or Do we build something or do we go out to market? How does the organization go about running that project? Is there a specific team that's there looking at all technology decisions? Do you form each time a group of experts? Like, how do you actually go through the process of making a new technology investment, specifically with the idea of that investment, delivering these kind of standardized service models?
Mm-hmm. It's so we attack it from a few different angles. I think one of the biggest, most meaningful inputs to that analysis or that evaluation is our clients. And so we have obviously we get anecdotal feedback from clients or advisors about, hey, here's, running with our Roth conversion example, there's a lot of opportunity, or we think there's a lot of opportunity to move the needle for clients in this way, but what's the best way for us to be doing that analysis? And those questions come back up through my group. They come up to our chief planning officer, and we have a kind of a task force, or we call ourselves the evidence driven planning committee. So we sit down and get to argue about like the best ways and what the evidence really tells us about the best ways to do certain planning topics. But I think kind of where I started with the clients, we have a systematic annual survey that we'll send out to clients. We've kind of built that into the expectation of the experience with the clients. And the important thing about that is we'll preface it. We'll send a unified message from our leadership saying, hey, this annual survey time, we try to make it a very painless experience to go through the survey. But the key thing is an example last year when we, in setting it up, saying, here's the stuff we learned from you last year and the things that we actually implemented or the things that we're moving towards, message directly to clients from Buckingham saying that your feedback matters and we're actually using this to make decisions and move forward. So you set that up, you do the survey, you collect the data, the information that's really important to you at that point in time. And then that is, that's a treasure for us because we can look and see what feedback we're getting from clients. And that is a big piece. It's not the only piece we're paying attention to. Obviously, we want to get feedback from the advisors and understand what areas they feel like there's room for improvement in terms of efficiency or being effective with what they're doing, whether it's just the analysis of the planning conversation or actually delivering the planning conversation with the client. So those are the two key inputs. And then we go try to solve for it. And sometimes it's just a better resource. Sometimes it's tools, it's workflows that we can build out so that folks, we do have a point of view on how to do something. And maybe we already have a tool that does it, inside of our planning software, for example, but folks just don't know exactly maybe how to use that tool or how how the pieces fit together there. So sometimes we just create the workflow of making sure the resource exists so we know how to use our existing tool set. And in the case of when we ended up partnering with Holistiplan, we just didn't have a tool set that allowed us to do it. And we had some advisors that were doing it, on a calculator, and some that built some spreadsheets, or some that were just, looking at a tax table and kind of making some guesses. And better than anybody else that there is, for as simple as that might seem, to fill up the rest of your friendly tax bracket if you're doing a Roth conversion, there's so many snakes in the grass that can jump up and get you if you're not really looking at all the angles. So that was an example where we knew we needed something better to kind of fill that need for us. And then obviously after looking at what Holistiplan did, not only did it help us in that specific area, but then it brought a lot of other stuff to the table that really helped us move the needle in the end client experience.
So that it sounds like you have like a council of a planning standards sort of council. I may be using the wrong words for it, and that group is a standing group, it sounds like. And not only is there to set standards but they also evaluate tools. So it's not like separate groups, like an IT specific group is separate from the planning group. I mean, presumably you have stakeholders from each of those groups.
You got it. And that's the thing. And so the fun thing, relative to when I was 4 people, kind of a small boutique independent RIA, and now part of something bigger with Buckingham is we gain scale to do a lot of cool, interesting things. So we do IT is a part of this. Now they don't know whether, one planning tool is better than the other planning tool. They're not planners. They know how to make the bits kind of talk to each other or get the databases to link up. So that rolls, and that's why we have an advisor and client experience team that I lead, where we'll take that feedback and say, we need to solve for X, but not really thinking about X as kind of a delivery or a better, more efficient process for our advisors. And I said that could be fintech, it could be other things. And then my small team will go out and kind of canvas to see what are the options. So then we'll go look and we'll do some initial valuation of the what's available from a fintech standpoint. Then we'll narrow the funnel a bit, and then we'll come back to our committee and share our findings, do some demos. Let's let everybody kind of kick the tires, ask the hard questions, so that we can feel really confident by the time we're making a decision to sign a contract, do an implementation, that we have the right tool that's going to really deliver on the needs that we have.
Got it. So now when we move downstream from that decision, we made the decision we're going to invest in this particular type of technology. There's then the adoption question, right? Because on paper, it's like, this is going to be great, and then everyone's going to use this, and it's going to solve all our problems. And then this is true for large firms, and even any firm with more than one person, I guess. You have the question of, is everybody using the product to the extent that we expected, and the way that we expected? Right. How do you, as an organization, again, much larger, you can't just look down the hall and see if someone's got Holistiplan open or whatever, or they're using a spreadsheet. How do you then translate the theory into practice as far as technology investments?
And you're right, because you could have the most beautiful picture in your head about how this is going to go. You implement it, if you don't get adoption, and it's all totally pointless. So there's a lot of things. There's, again, another multidimensional thing. Here's some of the key highlights that we think about is, as simple as this sounds, this is super important, is it just has to be really easy to use, usable. Now, there's some, planning softwares out there that are designed, they're complicated issues we're trying to solve around, so there's a learning curve associated with using the tool, understanding how to get to the right advice, and then implementing that or using that to deliver client advice. But to the extent possible, and that's one of the beautiful things about Holistiplan, is to get a tax report. You gotta get yourself into the platform, and then you gotta click a button. You have to, I guess maybe the hardest part, the most effort, is actually collecting the tax return from the client. And again, that's, with some teams, that was already part of the picture, and that was and so they already had them saved in their virtual client drive. And others that weren't as comfortable with taxes, maybe that wasn't always a part of the wealth management conversation with the client. Maybe when we had a specific tax issue that or a specific question that was going to be related to taxes, we'd ask and kind of get a reference on that, but wasn't like every year bring me a copy of your tax return. So part of it is again just kind of standardizing. Let's make sure that that's part of the conversation. That is has always been part of Buckingham's value proposition. Is we want to be holistic in our planning approach, and so taxes are always a part of that. And we've always paid a lot of attention to how our investment management impacts their tax outcome. But let's take that a step deeper, and we can see that manifest on the tax return, but let's on an annual basis understand what's in that tax return. So get that collected, we get it uploaded, you do the hard work because your software goes through and reads that tax return, creates the tax report. And that brings me to another really big headline with this in terms of adoption is advisors are great people, right? We're out here to help people. And when you have this comprehensive wealth management value proposition, where it's we'll do investments, and that's a very important part in that of the planning process, and that's how our industry kind of grew up, was investment focused. But if you're going to be a comprehensive planner, there's so many other things that are a part of the picture that aren't investments. And honestly, I think clients struggle to understand that, or maybe better put, we struggle as advisors to demonstrate our value, our additional value in those areas. Totally. Like asset location, we're doing a great job of that, but it doesn't show up on a report necessarily anywhere.
Yep.
And so that's the beautiful thing again about Holistiplan, and where we found a lot of success with our implementation, is that tax report. If we do nothing else, and we're not even in scenario analysis and doing tax planning, which we definitely want to do, but just having a 2-page report that demystifies a 75-page, tax return that you get back from your CPA that nobody understands, to put it down there and say, here are the important things. Here are your key facts. Here are your key numbers. Here's where you land inside these brackets that you hear about sometimes. Here's why, some of the other things we've talked about matter. And then obviously you can get to the second page. And if there's meaningful observations about opportunities, now we're really moving the needle for the client. And it helps level up or make us a little more consistent in doing the analysis and identifying the opportunities as an advisor. But honestly, Roger, just that 2-page something to put down in front of the client, say, here's why you gave me your tax return, why I asked for this thing all the time, is I want to understand all these things. And this actually influences what we're doing over here with this, these different areas of planning. The point I'm trying to make is, as soon as we have something that impacts the client experience and is good for the client, it is remarkable how we get advisor adoption.
That's how they get it. Yeah.
When I tell you as an advisor, here's a tool that's going to make you more effective and more efficient, I'm going to need to, I mean, that's why I need to crack the whip a little bit more on implementation and adoption, because advisors might, and I guess justifiably so in some cases, say, I'm happy with how I already do it. And I know maybe there's a better way to do it, but I don't want to spend the time to learn how to do that thing. So I'm just going to do the thing I always did. And my client doesn't know any different. But when you can roll that thing all the way through the advisor experience and into the client experience, then that's when you get major adoption. So that would be like, if I'm giving advice here is making the ask for the tax return, generating the tax report, and reviewing the tax report with the client. As simple as it seems, the data on that page for the advisor, a CFP, or somebody that understands tax returns, it actually almost unanimously with clients, they're just like, wow, this is really cool. Like, thanks for sharing this with me. This makes sense, where that 75-page tax return, I never really fully understood.
Yeah. My confession here is even though I've been with Holistiplan since literally the first day of its existence, I don't think I fully realized what the value was until recently. Like,
how did you find out?
Well, I guess the first few years of our existence, I thought we were a efficiency tool, which we are, right? Yeah. And that's in my mind what we were. And it was like, we're trying to bring efficient, and that's the messaging I would use when I talked about what we did. But what I realized is that deliverable is we should be a deliverable company, right? We should be because it's true, all the other infrastructure has to happen around that, but that is the most important part. That part where you have a thing and you're in front of a client and you're having a conversation with a client about, here's something I found about you, or even I found nothing, but I'm at least explaining something to you in a way that you didn't understand before, even if I found nothing.
Usually when you find nothing, it's because we did something right before.
Right. Yeah. Hopefully, the hope is you find nothing, actually, which is like, hey, everything's great. That's what you hired me to do, is like, we've already covered this. And I think for so long, I embraced we're a process automation company and not we are a deliverable company that happens to assist with creating the deliverable. So I think just in general, the reason I bring that up is I think that's really, now that I've at least had that insight, which I'm probably later to than like thousands of people, I think that means that gives us new focus for what we can do as a company, which is, let's focus on more deliverables, like that Roth conversion conversation. Like that's a challenging conversation, right? Hey, I promise you this is going to be really valuable later, but you need to write a check for $40,000 today to the government, right? Complicated conversation, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And so how do we give advisors the tools? I'm just using that example because we started with it, but also because we are cooking something up right now. How do we make that conversation really, really easy and crystallize it down to a really effective way to communicate that idea to a client? And then enable the advisor to prepare everything so they can get everything together for that one moment. So anyway, I'm later to this insight than you are, obviously, but I'm just telling you, like, I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm glad you're seeing the forest.
Yeah, there we go. What we're talking about a lot about, like, top down, and not really enforcing, but creating standards across an organization. But of course, we want to make sure that planning, which is a creative discipline, that we allow people to be creative still. And so how do you as an organization handle that tension, right? Between, we want to make sure you do it the Buckingham way, because the Buckingham way we've studied and we've all agreed this is what we're going to do, but also when that spark of creativity happens, how do you allow them to run with that? And then how do you make sure that as an organization, you hear that and are able to spread that out and benefit from those economies of scale you have?
Right. That's tricky. And it's probably it's definitely one of the most difficult things we have to think through, right? So here's the framework we have is we want to have guardrails, along the way for how our advisors are executing anything. That said, we don't want to just give advisors a blank canvas and say, go do whatever your style is to do. And I guess I don't want to I don't want to demonize that. I think there's a lot of bigger firms that have locations where they just kind of operate independently, and there's there's wins to be had there. But it is very much our model to be more standardized. So we will what we aim to do is create, I'll call it a best practice of the easy button of, if you don't come to the conversation or come to this particular planning topic with a disposition or a way of doing things, or experience here, I want to provide a very simple, executable, thoughtful process for you to do that, beginning to end, in terms of like even educating you. Our processes will give you a little foundation of how do we think about this particular planning topic. And it's, we don't want to teach you everything you need to know for a CFP, because we're already assuming you're going to be a CFP, but what is kind of Buckingham's way of that particular topic built on top of the foundation of the CFP curriculum, and then going through and then providing a guidance on, okay, what do you need to do to prepare to do this analysis? What information do you need to collect, whether it's data, tax returns, objectives and goals from the clients, and really understanding like what is important to them, and more than just money stuff too, like even like what are their values, and like how will this planning align with what's really, makes them kind of uniquely them, personal stuff, as opposed to just maximizing dollars. That's always a win, but we want to make sure that we can connect our advice to the human elements of our client, and then move that down to actually how do we do the analysis, tool specific or not. Typically for like I said before, for the weightier planning, we're going to have some kind of fintech piece of technology that will help us do the analysis. Then to how to have the client conversation. That is one that I think is overlooked a lot.
Totally.
But we want to provide, and it's, to the point that you were making earlier, Roger, where it's one thing for us to come up with great advice, but if we don't give it the right way, or if we don't explain it and educate along the way, our implementation of that advice is down the chutes. Go look up Advice That Sticks, written by Dr. Moira Summers, and it's an incredible study of like how there is this epidemic of unimplemented advice in our industry, and so you want to set it up and kind of explain it the right ways to the clients, so that they're gonna want to stick with it. And that's kind of back to my point before about linking it to what is actually important to them, not just dollars and cents, but like what's important to you as a human, via some life planning that we'll do to kind of link that up and say, okay, this is how this actually helps you in pursuit of not only being, having more stable wealth, but pursuit of what's really important to you, if that's, whatever it is, your beach house or more time with the grandkids or whatever those things end up being. So but again, that when I have my best practice, we know that we can't expect everybody to do exactly that specific process. So we'll say, okay, we want you to kind of live inside of these guardrails, but go ahead and feel free, advisors, to apply your own style, or kind of manage the process as you think is going to be most efficient for you. We all have the same goals in mind of just being, effective, efficient advisors and being profitable advisors. So if they feel like they have a way to do that, I don't want to try to break their old habits and train them new ones if we're going to end up at the same destination either way. That's why there's guardrails, is eventually something can get way out of whack, and then we'll have to kind of watch out for that and rein that back in. But typically, if that's the case, they've raised their hand and say, I'm out of whack in this area for some reason. I'm not efficient, or I don't have enough time to meet with all my clients, or my client meetings are going way too long. We can come back and say, here's a way to maybe rethink the way that you're executing that, and kind of bring you inside those guardrails. And if they say, just teach me from scratch, I've got that best practice I can put in front of them.
Yeah. And I guess presumably, let's say that advisors, they have, look, I have a different way of explaining this to clients, and here's the deliverable I use. Presumably there's a cultural piece you have to encourage, which is like, please don't hide that. Mm-hmm. Let's have an open dialogue about that, and you make sure that there's a way for them to communicate up. Hey, this thing seems to be working. This is right. Like, this new way of describing Roth conversions is really landing well. And, you need a way, I guess, that planning council that you talked about, where you do a survey of your advisors and your customer and your clients, allows you hopefully to catch when some new thing is working out. And look at it as an organization.
And that's probably the hardest part, Roger. And I can't pretend like we've totally nailed it, but we are purposeful about trying to understand what our teams are actually doing, boots on the ground, sitting across the table from clients. And yeah, exactly. If they have a different piece or a sketch they use, or a different way to communicate something, we want to consume that. And if it's awesome and like something we never thought about and is really cool, like we can standardize that and make that part of that best practice. or if it's just another option that kind of fits inside of our guardrails, well, then sometimes we certainly want to still capture that and kind of put that inside of our learning and development platform. So when other advisors are looking for other ways to communicate that, it lives in our ecosystem. So it's at least available that way.
Yeah, that's got to be, I mean, honestly, I'm envious. It's got to be a really fascinating place to be, to see, planning is, like I said, it's so creative. You have the benefit of seeing what hundreds of different people are doing to address, certain fact patterns or certain client situations. I'm sure it's got to be very fascinating and enjoyable. One thing on the tech side that I just wanted to mention as an aside, it's not really related to planning, but I think there's also the security question of, multiple offices. You've got hundreds of people joining the firm, people leaving the firm, and when you're talking about 4 or 5 folks, 10 folks in an office, you can kind of keep track of that stuff, right? Turn in your keys, and I'll change the password on your 10 logins that you have. But once you're talking about hundreds of people, I imagine that's got to be a nightmare. And I'm not asking you to give us your security positioning, because that's not the right thing to blast out into the world. I
couldn't answer it anyway.
But I know that there are decisions you have to make there, and with respect to looking at a tech stack, and probably certain requirements you will have when you go to vendors and say, look, I need to make sure y'all have this, because this is a choice we've made security wise. Any thoughts on that, especially moving from like a 4-person firm to a big firm? How did your thinking have to change on that?
So yeah, the thing, and this kind of back to the collaboration stuff we talked about, where there is, we'll do the planning team will do some initial analysis of a fintech tool and narrow the funnel and say, maybe say Holistiplan is really interesting to us. Then we get to partner and have the benefit of scale to have a great IT team, a great compliance team. So they'll put, whatever the solution we're looking at through their, through their process to get approval to make sure that security and those elements are in place. And we've had experiences in the past where they've done that analysis with fintech firms and said, I don't really like how they're set up here. Here's what they could do to fix it. Or ultimately it was a tool that we ended up not implementing because we couldn't get to a comfort level. So there's certainly that part. The other part that you touched on, Roger, is exactly, it's with 200 advisors. Not only is that volume for like a lot of advisors, but when then you have, that rolls into call it 75 teams or so. It's not like there's, one senior advisor, one junior advisor. That's the way every team is built. And then, you repeat that over and over again. Sometimes you'll have 1 senior advisor, 2 junior advisors. Sometimes you'll have 3 senior advisors and 2 junior advisors. Sometimes one of those junior advisors actually works with 2 different teams. They're kind of a shared resource. And so not only do you have to manage or think through solving for managing a lot of different credentials, you also have to think through how do you do the appropriate sharing, right? Because if you're a senior advisor and I'm a senior advisor and we have our own books of clients, but we share a resource that we want to have access to both of ours, does that mean that shared resource has to have the Aaron version of the login and then the Roger version of the login? It gets really sticky really quickly. And so what we've done is basically outside of our core systems, so we have a CRM and a portfolio management system where we do maintain that kind of permission set. But what we don't want to have to do is maintain that permission set in 10 or 15 other pieces of software that we're connected to or pieces that are in our tech stack. So we figured out kind of a clever implementation where we can use some modern technology to use something called an SSO or single sign-on. That's just I know you know what this is, but that's the experience when you're in one platform and you can click a button and it'll open the other one and you're automatically logged in. So we'll do that from one of our main systems where we already maintain our permission set. And then if a user can see that client household because they're already permissioned there, they can click the magic Holistiplan button and it just opens up Holistiplan directly on that household. And that's the other thing that rather than going to Holistiplan, I know most users will go in and kind of have your whole holistic view as like one of the dashboard views you can see of all the clients. We just land them, we kind of hide that page and we just land them directly on that client household. And so that allows us a couple of big things. It allows us to leverage the permission set we already have and maintain somewhere else. It actually puts us in a situation where there's no credentials to maintain. So my users have no idea what their username or password are, because they just click the magic button and it happens. Like they just launch directly in. So, we don't have to go through the admin of the resets and what happened here, or something got locked out. It just automatically happens. And then obviously it's kind of dynamic over time. So as people leave the firm, as people are added to teams, it just the button, if you leave the firm, you don't have access to the button anymore. So that kind of solves that. And if you're new to the team, you have access to the client, the button is there, you click it and you launch in. And we don't really have to be doing a lot of manual addition and deletion of individual users.
Yeah, to me, this has been another area where my understanding has totally evolved. Back in my days in a smaller firm, when I heard about single sign-on, I thought, oh, that's a convenience feature.
Right.
Pretty much just a convenience feature. And people would talk about, oh, you can click through your TD Ameritrade thing and then see your other, and it's like, okay, this is kind of a,
right.
But the reality is it goes so much deeper as you start to hit major scale, which is, the idea of centralizing access. Like when someone joins or leaves a firm, if you have hundreds of people in the firm, you have that's happening every week.
Yeah.
And the idea of like someone having to, and if you have 10 systems, having to create and remove permissions for those 10 systems, like that becomes like a full-time job for someone. Whereas if you have one single source of whatever that's called, single source of truth for who's in your organization,
right?
Delete them once and they're gone.
Right.
And then I think what you talked about is really the next frontier, which is the provisioning piece. So that's one thing, just like who works for me or not. I think that's what single sign-on gets us. I think the next frontier, and all of us as tech vendors need to figure out how to make these systems talk to each other. And I don't hear this in the conversation, but just like you said, like if you within your Salesforce system or CRM system have access to the Smith household, well, Holistiplan, how do we make sure that provisioning of data security transfers over to these other systems? And that's not a conversation that's happening out there. And I think it needs to be, especially as firms. It's fine, again, when firms are 3 or 4 advisors, you can kind of figure it out, deal with it. But once we hit the scale that you're at, that's a real problem. Just that provisioning, that's just data security. Then there's permissions within the software itself, which is complicated also. How do you handle that centrally? And I know there are firms like Okta, which is like, that's a standalone firm that's just trying to tackle this problem. But to me, it's fascinating. And I think there's going to be a lot of really interesting work happening there. So thank you for sharing how y'all are handling that. Who would have thought, by the way, think 5 or 10 years ago when we were at conferences and people were talking about moving their CRMs onto the cloud. Remember that? And people were like, I will never put my client's social security number and address on the cloud, And now, first of all, that's just a given that's where it'll be. But second of all, now we're actually hiring companies like Okta to manage our security, our actual logins and all of our employee information is on the cloud. Like our actual provisioning and single sign-on is not something that's internal, but something that we've actively hired an external third party to manage for. It just blows my mind, so
come a long way.
Yeah, we have. Holistiplan would not have existed as a company 5 years ago. People would not have been ready for the idea of loading this information online. Some of them are not, but even in the last few years, I've seen we've just accepted that, like, you can actually be more secure.
Right.
If you do it right, you can be more secure on the cloud than not.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you for that. So we always finish these with 2 questions. One is Roger in the hot seat. This is your chance to ask me any awkward question you want about Holistiplan or security or whatever you want to do. Feel free to fire away there.
All right. Okay. They told me to make it a hard one. So let's
fine.
See. I can't wait to hear your answer to this one.
That's fine.
All right. So after Holistiplan conquers all things tax planning, what other part of the planning world do you guys plan to disrupt?
Okay. So our goal going in, before even Holistiplan existed, when I left my job as a financial advisor, I spent a year building it was kind of a direct to consumer idea of a choose your own adventure, build your own plan. And that did cover it. I attempted to cover all the aspects of planning. Total failure. That was a year of my life that crashed and burned, but out of it came the idea of, well, maybe we try to build something for advisors. And we landed on tax. Yeah, version 1 of Holistiplan had some interesting stuff around like property casualty insurance. There's a lot of aspects when you think about financial planning and then financial planning software. There's good software that's been around for a lot of years that's strategic, right? It's here's, if you do this today, here's where you're going to be 20 years from now. Like we have a lot of good stuff around that we have a lot of good products that do that for us. But when you think about our jobs as financial planners, like what we're doing day to day, for the most part, it's very what we call tactical planning. It's like, all right, I got this decision today about my employee benefits for my, whatever, I started a new job. Can you help me make that decision? Or here's my tax return. Is everything look okay with this tax return? And like, we actually spend most of our time with that. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't sit there running projections all day. When I was an advisor, that's not what I was doing all the time.
Right.
How many times can you run a projection? So there's a lot of financial planning that is tactical in nature, that is also just terribly not scalable. And that's why a lot of people either don't do it, or that's why, like in your firm, you're having to build a lot of that infrastructure yourselves because they're not out of the box solutions.
Right.
Or how do you have that conversation about this, about that? Now, I will say, like, there's plenty more to do on tax. Like the example we talked about with Roth conversions, like, yes, you can upload a return and see a report about that return, but how do we have that conversation about a Roth conversion or about charitable giving? Like, there are distinct, again, deliverables. I want to really think about how we put deliverables in the hands of advisors so they can have those conversations. And what's great about a deliverable is, yes, it gets you in that moment of what's the client going to see, but also it helps to guide you as to what data to collect, right? If it's just like, okay, go do a Roth conversion for your client, like that's a very open-ended request. But if I have a deliverable to start with, so I know as a starting point what I'm going to talk about with a client, then we can put some infrastructure in front of that says, here's the necessary data to collect before you get to that. And then on the back end of it is like, here's how we have that conversation. So that's what's got me really jazzed, is the idea of going beyond just looking at a tax return, having meaningful conversations in all the areas of financial planning that we get to do as advisors. And that's a huge thing that will take a lifetime to do. But I think what we've learned about reading tax returns and delivering information about that will really help us, I think, do a great job with those other aspects. I'm excited, at least.
All right. Looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
I have another question. If you ducked that question, I had another question I was going to ask you.
Yeah. Okay.
It was if you had a code on your luggage, what would that code be? Like a lock code.
Oh. So it needs to be a number. You're really asking me for a meaningful number.
No, well, there's an easy one. You can ask your friend Jeff Levine. I think he would know the movie quote that I'm trying to get you to pull out.
Spaceballs 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay. I didn't know if that was like a get to know you question. Like, what's the most meaningful number in your life?
1040, right? I figured you were going to go 1040.
No, it haunts my dreams.
All right.
And certainly not 6251, the AMT form.
We can agree.
I am a fan of the new 8812 form. That's the new child tax credit form. But
that is great. I'll look up your podcast where you have your power rankings of your favorite tax forms.
Yeah, that one's not going to be a hit. Yeah, so yeah, maybe 8812 if I were to put a lock on my luggage. Not 1, 2, 3, 4. No.
All right.
So okay, thank you. That wasn't too hard for me. That was okay. One day someone's going to ask me, like, tell me why you don't have phone support. We'll see how I answer that question. All right. So my last question for you, we call the series Winning Big with Holistiplan. So I want to ask something big about your life. What's the most epic thing that you can think of that you've done personally or professionally?
You sent me down some kind of like spiral existential crisis of like, I've not actually done anything epic in my life. If Roger's going to ask me this question, I don't know if I have a great, here's what I came up with. And it's not like an accomplishment that I had, but it's certainly a fun story to tell. A good friend of mine, a guy that I've known since 7th grade and then through college and after, married the woman that plays Angela on The Office. And so I went to his wedding, and it was like this crazy surreal night, beautiful wedding, like outside of Malibu in the canyons there. And but I was like partying with like the cast of The Office, and this was kind of in the lull between like when the series had ended and before it had this like renaissance where everybody rewatches it, and there's all the podcasts about it and everything else. So yeah, I was like there on the dance floor with it's kind of, and it was actually kind of perfect and funny because it was mostly like the B level cast, like the main stars weren't necessarily there, but it was like everybody else was there. So it's just like exactly what you kind of picture if you were actually hanging out with the actual characters from The Office. So that was kind of like a fun thing, and a story I can tell.
I did a thing once. This is back when I was in high school. That was during the Atlanta Olympics. I lived on the East Coast, and I was a track runner. And so I went down with some of my track friends after we graduated high school. And we were there for one of the qualifying races for the 10,000 meter, not a crowd favorite track event, right? Like 8,000 laps around the track. And it's not even the finals, it's a qualifying, right? So we're in the stadium all by ourselves, and we see down right by the finish line is the entire Ethiopian track team.
Okay.
And we're like, well, no one's here. Let's just go for it and hang out with these guys. Your story reminded me of this. And so we just go down there, and we're like track nerds, and we're hanging out with the Ethiopian Olympic track team. And it was amazing. Like, we were just hanging out with these dudes. There'd be like a guy who's one of the coaches, and he's like, yeah, I used to have the world record in the marathon, but then that guy over there, he broke my record. And then this guy over here broke his record. It was crazy. It was one of those moments like, how did I end up in this group of people who were just really actually pretty chill, like they're actually grateful to have someone to talk with about their experience. But yeah, it reminded me of that. Well, maybe not as epic, but a fun moment in my life for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, Aaron, this was super fun. I learned some things. I really, really appreciate you have a very unique perspective on our profession and the types of investments we make in technology, but then also in our people and our processes. So I really, really appreciate the time you spent with me to share what you've learned there at Buckingham.
Absolutely. This was fun. Thanks for the good questions, the good conversation. I'm really looking forward to seeing all the new cool stuff you guys are working on and will come up with in the future.
All right. We'll do our best to deliver. Thank you, Aaron.
No pressure. Take care.
Thanks.